Well, let's get some analysis on this rather extraordinary story. Douglas Herbert is our foreign affairs commentator. He's with me now. And Doug, you actually witnessed the attempted coup in Russia back in 1991. I wonder if you see any similarities between what happened then and the extraordinary events of this weekend.
They were both attempted coups and they were aborted coups in a sense. But you're absolutely right. I happened to be in Moscow on holiday back then. I was woken up by a friend shouting to me basically "Voyenny Perivorot," which in Russian means military overthrow. You know,
oh, no.
What's going on? Well, on Russian TV, you saw basically Swan Lake, which used to be the clear sign that something is up when they're showing Swan Lake Ballet. But on other Western television stations, they were showing tanks rolling on the streets of Moscow down Kuznetsky Prospect. Look, what happened back then obviously is different in its particulars. Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union, was on holiday in his dacha in the Crimea. He was detained while he was on holiday. He wasn't in Moscow. He was thousands of miles from Moscow. And in Moscow itself, a committee called the GKChP, which was the committee they called themselves the Committee for Emergency Situations, high-level functionaries taken from the high rankings of the Communist Party and the KGB and the Interior Ministry, all sort of in a cabal. They were called the Gang of Eight, all presented themselves on television and made a statement that Gorbachev had been detained. They were presumably the new power in Russia. They were going to be calling the shots. For 2 days, literally for about 48 hours, until the August 1991 coup plot crumbled, there really was a sense in Russia, and the Russians have seen everything and done everything, that was konец demokratii, as one taxi driver told me, the end of democracy in Russia. They thought it was over. They thought that the reform period that Gorbachev had initiated, the reforms known as glasnost for openness, a free press, perestroika, the restructuring of the economy, letting joint private enterprises flourish in Moscow. All of that was over, and what this committee had sought to do was basically reel things back to a very much more staunch, darker vision, a Soviet past without that openness, without those reforms, a Soviet past. The people who arrayed themselves against Gorbachev were, like I said, from the system itself, were the staunch hardline KGB elements. It was the ultimate conspiracy and plot against him. And ultimately, paradoxically, it was brought down. There were two coups. A counter coup 2 days later when Boris Yeltsin, not yet president of Russia, climbed up onto a tank, rallied the opposition against these coup plotters, and faced down the coup, and ironically saved Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev was released from detention, came back very much humbled, chastened, humiliated, if you will, to Moscow with his wife Raisa. You could see their ashen faces. He would survive 3 more months in power because a little more than 3 months later was the final collapse of the Soviet Union when it ceased to exist as a geopolitical entity at the end of 1991.
So bring us forward then to today, Doug. What do you think happens then to Vladimir Putin and to Prigozhin as well, the head of Wagner?
Yeah, I mean, Putin is interesting here because, look, Gorbachev was beloved. He was an idol of the West. Everyone embraced him, and they perhaps invested too much in the personality and this cult of Gorbachev that existed in the West. But he was actually very weak and unpopular at home. There was a lot of internal opposition to him on the home front in the then Soviet Union, as we saw in this coup. Gorbachev came back a very weak president. I said that he was out of power, out of the Soviet Union 3 months later. Putin, as every headline is now saying, there seems to be a consensus, he has been weakened. Yes, this aborted mutiny has shown him to be vulnerable. Yes, it is shown that he is not the Superman that perhaps a lot of people thought he was, the shrewd, calculating KGB man who can beat off any opponent. Prigozhin, in that sense, called his bluff. Putin's weakened. Is he out? No, he's not. He could yet pull another card from his sleeve and consolidate power again. There's still a lot of fear around Putin, even in his weakened state. But I will tell you this, there are a lot of people around him who remained silent for about 12 to 13 hours during this mutiny, prior to see how things were going to play out, did not rush to support him. There's a lot of calculating going on. My sense is that Putin, being an ex-KGB man, he's paranoid to begin with, a lot of people say. He knows very well that there is a lot of people perhaps plotting against him or who would like his job, and I think he's going to be more paranoid than ever, and I think he knows that the months ahead are going to be very precarious. He might not show it. He might not show it, but he knows that his position, he is on very, very rocky footing, and he's going to have to literally watch his step in the weeks and months ahead.
Extraordinary. Thanks very much. Douglas Herbert for us there.